All right. When we think about the book of Habakkuk, one of the things we see within it that is sort of threaded through it is the fact that nations rise and fall based on the will of God. This is taught multiple places throughout the Bible, that things in life may look chaotic, they may look uncertain to us. We may not understand what's happening and unfolding, but we always need to be mindful that whatever is going on, God is ultimately in control. And having that kind of faith allows us to go through times of uncertainty, times of chaos, with a peace of mind. It can be a struggle at times, but we can do that if we have that ultimate faith in the Lord and His rule over this world. The book of Habakkuk. Does anybody remember the context, the historical setting, what's going on when he did his work and gave his teaching here? Anybody have a rough time frame? Clint?
The last days of Judah, basically.
Okay, yeah, the last days of Judah. So somewhere around the 612 to 606 time frame, somewhere in there, what was significant around 612? Does anybody remember that? I know it's kind of out of the blue and a random date for some folks, but 612?
Fall of Nineveh.
Okay, yeah, Babylon had swept across and they had taken Nineveh down, so they had defeated the Assyrian Empire. It had crumbled, it was gone. And then when you get down to 606, 605 time frame, does anybody remember what happened around that time frame?
That was when Judah would have been attacked by the Babylonians.
Right.
First attack.
Yes, it was that first wave of attack from Babylon into Judah and on Jerusalem. They carried away captives, which included Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So it's somewhere in that time frame, roughly, that Habakkuk is doing his teaching, his preaching, the prophesying to the people of Judah. Jehoiakim in particular, and maybe perhaps part of Jehoahaz, but Jehoiakim ruled in Judah, and Jehoiakim was an evil ruler. If you go back to 2 Chronicles 36 or Jeremiah 22, you can see that sin was rampant, but the nation was crumbling at that time, the southern nation of Judah. So we keep that in mind, thinking about this as we read the book of Habakkuk and see what it is that he's saying, what points he's bringing up. Anything else before we jump into the book and begin to read down through and see what the message is here? All right, Habakkuk, let's read chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. 1 through 11. Who will grab that for us? John?
The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Or cry to you, violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. Look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded. For I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. For behold, I am raising the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation who marched through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are dreaded and fearsome. Their justice and dignity go forth from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than the evening wolves. Their horsemen press proudly on. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle, swift to devour. They all come from violence, all their faces forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff, and at rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress, for they pile up the earth and take it. Then they sweep by like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own might is their God.
Okay. So the first thing we notice here is that Habakkuk is asking questions, and he'll ask another question here a little bit later. But one of the basic things I want us to think about is the fact that questioning God is not necessarily a sinful thing. Now, if we're challenging God or we are condemning God in the questioning, that's not right. But what perspective is Habakkuk coming from? Is he coming from a perspective of challenging God, of saying, God, you're wrong? Why would...
Well, he's coming from the perspective that we often share sometimes. We don't understand why things are occurring the way they are, unchecked.
Okay. Exactly right. We don't understand. We wonder why. We wonder how. And so we may ask those kinds of things. Now, question number 1 that we had on our worksheet is, what is Habakkuk's question and what is bothering him? I asked you to consider if you had similar thoughts and where in the New Testament there is a similar plea. So, breaking that down, what's his question? What is it that's troubling him?
How long will the wicked go unpunished?
How long will the wicked go unpunished? And who does he have in mind here?
Judah.
Yes, his own nation. He's thinking about there's so much sin, so much wickedness in the southern kingdom. They're wrapped up in idolatry. Lord, how long can you tolerate this going on? Have you ever had that question? I know I've had that question about our nation, which is crazy thinking about, I had that question 20 years ago. And how bad it's gotten now, we talk among ourselves and we say, well, how long can the Lord let this keep going? When you look back into the Bible, what is it that raises that question in our minds? Why would we even ask this?
Well, for me, when I question like that, it's because if the sin that I see is bothering me, what must it be doing with God?
Okay, if the sin's bothering you, what is it doing to God? Why?
Because He's holy and He's sinless.
Yes, because we know the righteous character of God. See, Habakkuk's not asking this question from the standpoint of, God, are you actually moral? Are you just? Where is that? Where's your character? He's not asking it from that perspective. He's asking it from the perspective he knows God. Well, God, how can you stand this? What might be another reason related to that? Why would we ask, how long are you going to tolerate this? Clint?
The Word of God is that measuring stick of righteousness, right? So when we clearly see sin and it's laid out for everyone to read, and it's a violation, then it just becomes black and white in some facets. And so when you look at it in that regard, with the lens of here's the Word, and you measure to what's happening, there's a stark contrast. And so now it's, how patient is God?
Okay. What happened in Genesis 3? Adam and Eve sinned, and what happened then?
Cast out of the garden.
They're cast out of the garden, right? God announces consequences, and then they're cast out. What happened in Genesis 6, 7, 8? There's the flood. Because why? Because sin. God said, I'm done. What happened in Genesis chapter 19? Well, we could even back up to Genesis 11. Tower of Babel. People get together. God says, I'm acting against them. Genesis chapter 19, destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So you look back through history and you see where there's a point at which God says, no more. And He acts to bring that wickedness to an end. And there are times, because we know that about God, that we wonder, well, how bad does it have to get before this happens? And we've probably all had these conversations. Well, it's not as bad as in the days of Noah. Because God destroyed the world, and there were 8 people who survived that. So we just sit here from our human perspective wondering, what's going on? Why is this continuing to happen? Why has He not brought judgment? So, thinking about that, where is a similar plea in the New Testament? Anybody find one?
At Revelation 6, verses 9 and 10.
Okay, Revelation 6. So we jump to the end of the book, the good book that is. Revelation 6. And let's read 9 through 11 there. Who will get that for us? Revelation 6, 9 through 11. Philip.
When He opened the 5th seal, I saw to the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God, for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed.
Okay. Now let's set the context for Revelation. Just like Habakkuk was preaching and prophesying in the context of Judah, of the corruption, the sin, the crumbling, what was about to come. In the book of Revelation, John is writing a message from God that's within a historical context. And that historical context was saints in the first century were being persecuted by the Roman government. And as it said there were those, as he receives this vision, those who had been slain for the word of God, for the testimony which they held. So because of their faith, they had been put to death. And what he's seeing here is that these saints who are there, who have given their lives for the Lord, are calling out to the Lord, Lord, how long are you going to let this go on? How could this be that your children are being slaughtered and it just keeps going? Now, we're going to look in Habakkuk in a minute. God gives an answer to Habakkuk about it. And if I forget, remind me to come back to Revelation what the answer is. But there are times when we don't understand. When Habakkuk didn't understand, he's really speaking for the righteous among those in Judah. When in the first century there were those asking that question, why is this going on? And really the question behind that question in the book of Revelation is, will Christianity survive? Because this mighty Roman Empire is crushing us now. Now, back to the book of Habakkuk. So, what was the answer that the Lord gave? He asks a question, really verses 2 to 4. What's the answer that God gives in 5 through 11?
It's going to happen in your days.
It's going to happen in your days. And what does he say about that, by the way, in verse 5? Said that I'm going to act in your days, so it's not too far off.
Look at the nations among them.
Okay, look around. I'm going to act, and what does he say relative to that? Right there in verse 5, kind of in the middle and at the end. What's that? You're going to be astounded. And what else? You won't believe it. You won't. You're going to be utterly and completely shocked about what I'm going to do here. And he was, as we read on down through the chapter, he was shocked at what God told him. What did God tell him? What's going to happen? What's that? Verse 6.
Raising up the Chaldeans.
Chaldeans, who is who? Babylon, right?
Jeremiah calls it a battle axe that the Lord is going to wield against his people.
Okay. He's going to bring that battle axe against the children of Judah. It's going to be through the Chaldeans there. And notice how he describes them. Verse 6, they're a bitter and hasty nation. They march through the breadth of the earth. They are just coming on like a juggernaut, just crushing everything that's before them. Terrible, dreadful. Their horses swifter than leopards in verse 8. They're more fierce than evening wolves. So he describes them as this very powerful, very vicious, relentless force that is attacking. And that is what was happening with Babylon. They had taken out the Assyrian Empire, and as strong as it was and as vicious as they were, Babylon came along and smashed them. So now he says, well, that's who's going to come into Judah. And it's going to crush Judah and take Judah out. That's what I'm going to do about all the sin going on there among your people, where you live. That thing that you're crying out about, Lord, how long are you going to tolerate this? What are you going to do about it? Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring the Chaldeans in and crush them. Terrible destruction ahead. So, any thoughts to that point? Let's read chapter 1, verse 12, down through chapter 2, verse 1 now. Who will grab that for us? Habakkuk 1, 12 to 2, 1. Charles, you want to get that?
Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have appointed them for judgment. O Rock, you have marked them for correction. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look at those who deal treacherously, and hold your tongue when the wicked devour, a person more righteous than he? Why do you make men like fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with a hook. They cast them in their net, and gather them in their dragnet. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice to their net and burn incense to the dragnet. Because of them their share is sumptuous, and their food plentiful. Shall they therefore empty their net and continue to slay nations without pity? I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer when I am correct.
Okay, so question number 2 on the worksheet is associated with question number 2 that Habakkuk has. So what is it that's troubling him, and do you struggle with this today? So what's troubling Habakkuk?
Wickedness.
That the wicked are able to have advantage over the righteous and seemingly without consequences.
Okay.
And how could God use a more wicked nation to punish a wicked nation?
Yeah. As bad as Judah was, they were not as bad as the Babylonians. And when God said, the answer to your question about how long I'm going to tolerate Judah, well, it's not very much longer, and it's going to be Babylon's going to come in. It's going to astonish you. It's going to shock you. Yeah, he was astonished. He was shocked. Yeah, he wouldn't believe it. And so he begins there in verse 12. This is Habakkuk speaking in verse 12 again. You're from everlasting. You're the holy God. He believes in who He is, His character, His power. But because you're so pure, how could you let someone so wicked as Babylon come in and destroy a less wicked nation? I don't understand that. And He's not challenging God here. He's just saying, I don't really understand that. Do we ever struggle with that? So current day, present life, well, hold that thought. Back to the book of Revelation. The question of the saints under the altar there in Revelation chapter 6, crying out to God, how long, how long? What is God's answer through the rest of that book? God's answer in the book of Revelation is, I know exactly what's happening. I know who's doing it. And I'm going to bring them down. Christianity is going to survive. The cause of Christ will be triumphant. There's going to be some really hard times for a while now. You look at those letters to the 7 churches of Asia, and he says, there's a great trial that's coming. And some he says, I'm going to spare you from it. Others, basically, he's telling them, you're going to go right through the thick of it. And you need to be faithful unto death, to the point of being executed. So he gives that message. How long? Well, till I work this out. There are others who are going to give their lives for the cause of Christ. That needs to happen. That needs to unfold. And then that power, that Roman Empire, represented by the beast of the sea, and then you have the beast of the earth, you have the false religion that's wrapped up with them. You have all those things. He says, that's going to be brought down. I'm going to judge the Roman Empire. And so, today, where is that Roman Empire? It's gone. It doesn't exist. We read about it in history. Where is the cause of Christ? It's alive and well, thriving before the Lord. Right, Nancy?
Well, when I was reading through this, one thing that, along with his questioning this, is that God used an expression repeatedly in the Old Testament of a certain nation or people whose wickedness was not yet full.
Mm-hmm.
And he also, on the counterpart of that, used the expression that there were those who were still righteous. And they were the ones that kept things going because they were still righteous. So it's not just extremely, God can't look at wickedness. It's His purpose is going to be served, whether it's in wickedness or righteousness, His purpose will be served. And He used wickedness to punish Israel. He used wicked nations to punish Israel, but they were all punished as well. It's not that He exempted them from their wickedness, but they were used, and then their wickedness had to be paid as well.
Exactly right. And again, we describe this as the providence of God as He's working in the nations of men. We're too finite, we're too small to understand that bigger picture in His working, but He is working that out. And He's doing it for good to redeem the souls of men. Part of the message of the Babylonians coming in and crushing the nation of Judah, as we're going to see here in a little bit, you need to make sure you're right with the Lord. John, do you have something?
Well, we're told in Romans chapter 9 that God raised up Pharaoh so that his might be perfect. Well, He did that with Pharaoh. He did that with the Assyrians. He's doing that with the Babylonians. God raises up these nations so that His might be proclaimed, which leads to the salvation of mankind, as you pointed out. So while He's raising them up, as Nancy pointed out, He will punish them as well for their evilness. He's not hardening their hearts, but their hearts are hardened by His will and His commands. And they rebel against Him, and He uses them to show His power.
Right. Exactly right. So, do we struggle with this concept like Habakkuk did? Well, how could you let this more wicked nation have these victories in battle and spread and grow and build up and bring down those who are less wicked?
Well, I would say that's a question that kind of, I don't know if it was exactly a question, but a sense that with Russia and the Ukraine, how can that be right? That the Russians are doing this to the Ukrainians. It seems wrong. And that the rest of the world sits back and watches it, may contribute, but they're not going to change that outcome necessarily with what they're doing. But it's that kind of concept that things are going on in the world that we don't really understand.
How
Wouldn't side with the ones that appear to be, making progress necessarily.
how could Nazi Germany rise up and do things? And that's the thing. We can't see that bigger picture of what God sees and observes. And there are times when we look at a situation and we may misjudge what's going on and misunderstand what's happening. With the rise of China and them coming, I would say we're their number one target. Those bunch of communists, Buddhists, atheists, how could that happen? Well, how could the Chaldeans go in and crush Judah? Well, there's a reason for it, because Judah needed to be taught a lesson. And it very well may be that we need to be taught a lesson as a people. You know what? We actually do need God. Instead of all this sick perversion and wickedness going on in our land. John?
In a way, we can look at that, Russia-Ukraine situation. Well, Ukraine's evil, Russia's evil. Why is that happening? Well, why did God allow Babylon to go down there and conquer Egypt? Which one was worse? We don't know. Well, which is worse?
Or Assyria.
Which one's the worst between Ukraine and Russia? We don't know. Well, why is God allowing it to happen? We don't know. Which is who wins? Which one's right? Well, it doesn't matter because God's in control. And that's where we as Christians need to come to the realization my soul's salvation is safe. Nothing else matters.
Okay. I think on a practical level, I'm going to circle back to what you just said there. On a practical level, sometimes we sit there and go, why do evil people prosper? Immoral, ungodly, profane people become exceedingly rich and wealthy and powerful. How does that happen? Why? Why is that happening? And we struggle with that. There's one aspect on the national level, there's another aspect on the individual level that we have these questions. Why are they allowed to continue? And I'm struggling to get by from week to week. Why is that? Well, we don't know all those reasons. But trusting that God is the Almighty God sitting on His throne and He's working these things out. In chapter 2, verse 1, where we closed out the reading there, Habakkuk says, I'll stand and watch. I'm just going to wait, see what God says about this. And there are times when we just need to wait, see what He says, see what unfolds, see what happens there. So, the Lord then, verses 2 and 3. Let's read 2 through 4. Chapter 2, 2 through 4. Who will get that for us? Hank?
Then the Lord answered me and said, write this vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come and will not tarry. Behold, the proud. His soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith.
Okay. And we'll discuss these woes that he begins to proclaim in 5 and following there. But what's God's answer essentially to Habakkuk about Babylon? Well, Lord, how could you let that happen? Nancy mentioned a while ago. What's going to happen with Babylon?
The Medes and Persians are going to give them their just due. That's going to be by the hand of God.
Okay. And he mentioned there about the proud, whose soul is not upright in him. Who remembers the situation of how Babylon fell? Babylon fell when you go over to the book of Daniel, chapter 5. It was not Nebuchadnezzar. What was his son or grandson's name? Belshazzar. Okay. I was going to say that, but then I thought, was that Daniel's name? I'm just kidding. But Belshazzar, they're having a feast. They're having a drunken feast inside the walls. They know the army's camped outside. And they think they're safe in those impenetrable walls. But the Persian army diverted the water that ran up under the walls, and then they walked up under those walls, invaded the city, came into the city, and that was it. Just in a night it fell. So the Lord had that plan down the road that he would bring them down. So he says, okay, Habakkuk, I know you got a question, but here's what's going to happen. Here's the answer to it. Yeah, they're going to go down eventually. All right, so he says, the righteous shall live by faith. Question number 3 I had asked, consider Habakkuk 2:4, find where it is quoted in the New Testament and explain how it applies. So 2 verse 4, particularly zeroing in on, but the just shall live by faith. How many times is it quoted in the New Testament?
Romans 1:17, Galatians 3:11.
One more. Romans 1:17, Galatians 3:11.
Ephesians 4:11.
Hebrews 10. I believe it's verse 32. Somewhere in there. We'll get to it in just a second. So, when you look at Romans 1, 16 and 17 there. Romans 1, 16 and 17. This is the keynote of the book here. Romans 1, 16, 17. Who will read that for us? John.
For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as is written, the righteousness shall live by faith.
Okay, the righteous or the just shall live by faith. And in the context of the book, he's laying out the argument, and this is true also in Galatians chapter 3, that the Jews who were still trying to cling to that old law, to the ceremony, to the ritual, and all of that, and they thought the ceremony and the ritual of the law is what justified them. And Paul's saying, no, that ritual, that ceremony did not justify them. What justified people of the Old Testament, what justifies people in the New Testament is faith. Now, it's not faith alone, of course. What kind of faith is it?
Obedient.
Yeah, obedient faith, where they apply the Word of God in their life, they live by that, and they trust in the Lord to the point they obey His commandments, wherever those commandments may lead Him. And so, the just live by faith. They don't live by these rituals, by these ceremonies that were in the old law, by the works of man. They don't live by that. But there are things God commands us to do, and we have to follow those commands. No man can be justified when he stands there and he shakes his fist at God and says, I'm not going to do it because that's working. Well, that's foolish. That's just utterly foolish. So Hebrews chapter 10, let's take a peek there. Hebrews chapter 10. Yeah, Hebrews 10:38 is where it is. There's a context in there, though. Hebrews 10 let's begin in verse 32. Let's read down through 39, please. So longer reading, who will grab that for us? Hebrews 10:32-39, Elijah.
But recall the former days in which, after you were illuminated, you endured a great struggle with sufferings, partly while you were made a spectacle both by reproaches and tribulations, and partly while you became companions of those who were so treated. For you had compassion on me in my chains, and joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods, knowing that you have a better and an enduring possession for yourself in heaven. Therefore do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. For yet a little while, and he who is coming will come and will not tarry. Now the just shall live by faith, but if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe in the saving of the soul.
Okay, so he reminds these Hebrews where they were, what they went through when they became Christians. What's the context of the book? What's the struggle, the issue going on that this letter is written here?
It's continuous. Faithful people continue.
They were struggling against a problem here. Sean?
As far as against the persecution of the faithful.
Okay, there is a persecution. There is a heavy hand coming down on them, and it's a specific thing that's going on.
In the book of Hebrews, it's the people who wanted to still grab and hold on to the old law and do those things. But, like in Hebrews 9:4, it says it's not possible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. So stop doing those Old Testament laws and customs. We're done with that. Christ died, and now it's the new law, the New Testament. Hold on to those things.
Okay, there were those who were trying to hold to the old and also follow the new. And basically the Hebrew writer says you cannot do that. And one of the things is this pressure being put on them by the Jews. And this persecution coming against them. And he's writing this letter saying, don't give in to that. Be steadfast, keep the faith, because the just shall live by faith. Don't cast it away, verse 35. You're going to cast away your confidence, which has great reward. Don't give that up. And he winds it up by saying, God says, I don't have any pleasure in somebody who turns back. Well, right there, by the way, that tells us that once saved, always saved is not true. That people can serve God and then fall away or turn back, as he says here in verse 39, not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul. That means they remain steadfast and faithful unto the end. And then what does chapter 11 give us? When he quotes here, the just shall live by faith, what does he get into in 11?
Defines what faith is, and it gives example after example of what faith looks like in action by people who they could read about.
I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but when he brings up the just shall live by faith, then he basically buries them with this concept. Here's what faith is. If you want to live by faith, this is what you do. So somebody give me one or two things when he says the just shall live by faith, and then he explains, here's what it is. Okay, Abraham and Isaac. We'll come back to them in just a second. What's that?
Noah
Noah. What did Noah do?
built the ark.
But Noah was saved by faith. You're telling me he built an ark so he had work salvation?
No. He was obeying God's commands because of his faith.
He gives that example. Verse 7. Hebrews 11, verse 7. By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world became the heir of righteousness, which is according to faith. So it wasn't that Noah thought, well, I'm trusting in myself and I'm going to build me a boat. I'm going to get through this flood. No, he did it at God's command. That's what it is to live by faith. You hear God's command and you act upon it. Same was true with Abel that he gave as an example. Abraham was brought up a minute ago. When he went to offer a sacrifice of Isaac, he did it at God's command. And he goes through this chapter saying, here's what people do who are of faith, who live by faith. They hear God and they go and do it. And then he winds up that chapter, if you remember, all those who had all these sacrifices in Hebrews 11, verse 33, they subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword. So he's saying all these people acted by faith. Look at all those that sacrificed and suffered for it. You need to be ready to do the same. Okay? Go back to Habakkuk. What's about to unfold in the book of Habakkuk? When the Lord said, look, the just shall live by faith, who's he saying it to and why is he telling him that? Okay, if this was written, and we're pretty confident it was written between about 612 and 606, what did we say was getting ready to happen 606, 605?
Babylon's going to come and destroy Judah. And he's telling those people, the people of Judah, the ones that still have faith and are trying to live right, to be strong and this is my will. Recognize this is my will, and you'll be okay.
Okay. We're going to define that here in just a second. You've got the Babylonians that are getting ready to sweep into Judah and absolutely obliterate them in 3 different waves. The third one is where they raze the temple to the ground and Judah is no more. They're in captivity for 70 years. Then they come back, they rebuild the temple, come back later, they rebuild the walls and all of that. But they're getting ready to be ravaged in that nation. Just like the Hebrews were getting ready to face a ravaging. Says that's what's going to happen in Judah. And you have to live by faith. It's going to be scary. It's going to be difficult. You're not going to understand everything. You have to, though, stick to your faith. Trusting in God, serving God, doing His will. That's the only way you're going to survive. Now, He's not telling them, you're not going to die. You're not going to suffer. He wasn't telling the Hebrews, you're not going to die, you're not going to suffer. He said, you better be ready to die and to suffer. So in that context of living by faith, what does that mean? Look, even if you're executed, that's okay. Because as a child of God, that's all right. But the only way you're going to survive, whether that's with the preservation of your life or more importantly, the preservation of your soul, is if you live by faith. All right, so briefly, question number 4, we're not going to read this. What are the 5 woes pronounced against Babylon? Anybody got one?
Woe to him who increases what is not his.
Okay, you go and you steal stuff, right? Woe to him who does that. Babylon did that. They were voracious in going and attacking and plundering.
Do you want another woe?
Another woe would be great.
That uses evil gain for self-protection. And that cries out to the
Okay. It does cry out to the Lord. And notice there in verse 10, you give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples, and sin against your own soul. Right? Earlier, he had talked about how your creditor is going to come to you. And what the context is when you sin, you're building up this debt, and it's going to come due sooner or later. And when you sin now, you sin against your own soul. Yes, when we sin against other people. At times, we always sin against God, but we always, when we sin against our own soul. We're hurting ourselves. And he's pronouncing that woe against Babylon. They lived on bloodshed and violence, and he gave a woe, verses 15 to 17, about them getting others drunk to take advantage of them. They're abusive toward others. And then idolatry. Let's read chapter 2, verses 18 to 20. I do want to get this. 18 to 20. Philip.
What profit is the image that its maker should carve it, the molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust him to make new idols? What an image says to wood, awake, to silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him.
Okay, how does he describe idolatry?
Empty, meaningless.
Empty, pointless. In fact, it's ridiculous. In our modern terms, stupid. Why would you take a piece of wood and carve it and then set it down and expect something from it? Why? There's nothing in there. It's a piece of wood. But that's what people did and what people still do today. Idolatry is still alive and well. In contrast to that, verse 20, what does he say? Okay, understand what's going on here. He's saying, look, they go and they go to this piece of wood and they're speaking to this piece of wood. Hey, say something to me. Guide me. Give me some information. The wood is silent. He says, the reality is opposite. You need to be silent before God and hear what He has to say. Receive that message. That's true religion. John?
Charles read a question in verse 12 where it said, "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One?" Well, the answer starts in verse 4 where he says, "The righteous shall live by faith alone." In verse 14 it says, "For the earth will be filled with knowledge of the glory of God." And then 20, "But the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silent." That's the answer to that question in verse 12, those three verses.
Right. Right. He answers that God is in power, God is in control, God is almighty, and we need to sit before Him in awe and reverence and listen to what He has to say to us. Now, the very last thing about verses 17 to 19, chapter 3, we just don't have time to cover all of it, but Habakkuk expresses his faith in the Lord and that the Lord is going to take care of all of this. And he says, though the fig tree may not blossom, nor the fruit bear vines, the olive may fail, and the fields yield no crops. He's saying, even if it's complete devastation and destruction, I'm still going to have faith in the Lord. And we need to have that kind of faith as well. Though everything falls apart, we still are dedicated to Him. Thank you all, and Lord willing, Haggai next week.